I've heard criticism that one of the main challenges to the bloc's success is, of course, the relationship between India and China. Of course, there is this ongoing territorial dispute that started decades ago. It started back in 1962 and has not been resolved still. And my understanding that there were recent armed clashes on the border not too long ago. And recently, I also read that there was a protest or a series of protests in India against imports of goods that are manufactured in China. What is your perspective on the relationship between India and China, and how do you see it unfold in the near term? Are they going to be able to overcome these challenges and settle the differences?
Yeah, that's a big $1 trillion question. It's so sad, because if you look at the history of India and China, for maybe 2,000 years, the two countries had a wonderful relationship. The philosophers from China used to come to India. We used to share ideas about philosophy. The Chinese medicine had a lot of similar thoughts, like the Indian medicine, the Ayurveda. Buddhism spread from India to China. And if you go to Xinjiang, I went to China, to Xi'an, and I just walked into this random big Buddhist temple, and they had a statue which was made out of gold. And this statue was actually brought from India to China in about 300 AD. It was just like mind blowing. And the Chinese used to bring in all their goods, the silk, the tea, the porcelain, and they would drop it off in India. And this was like 2,000 years ago. And then the Indians would take the boats and they follow the monsoon winds, and they would go all the way up to Africa, and they would drop off the goods, and then the Africans would take the camels to carry it across the desert because they didn't have the Suez Canal at that time. And then from the other end, those goods would go to the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire, and the Roman kings would love the Chinese silk, and they used to call China the land of silk. Ceres something, that's in Italian. So they used to call it the land of silk, and they didn't even know where the silk came from. So the Italians thought that the silk just grew on the trees. So they thought it was some kind of plant product. Sorry. So we had a really good relationship with China for a long time. And the Himalayas were actually perfect because they separated the two countries. So we never had any border disputes for 2,000 years. And then the technology, it made it very easy for the soldiers to come in close contact. And then the British, they totally screwed up everything. They just drew random lines on the map. This was in the 19th century. The British didn't even go to that area. They didn't have satellites. They had no clue what the situation was in the mountains, and they just drew the lines, the McMahon lines, and they said, "Okay, so this is China, this is India." And then we're stuck with the lines that the British drew. So we may not be able to solve the problem at any time in the near future, but I think they should just freeze the situation. Just draw like a buffer line and just focus on all the other areas that the two countries could work together and could really benefit each other. Because just imagine with 3 billion people working together in peace and harmony. And there is a lot to do. China has developed far better than India. They are way ahead of us. And we are now where China was about 20 years ago in terms of the urbanization, GDP per capita, patents, manufacturing ability, the exports, and all those things that you can think of. We are 20 years behind. And there is a lot to gain from win-win, because China is getting too old, and they're also getting too rich, So the young Chinese people, they don't want to work in factories anymore. They want to do white-collar jobs. They want to do social media. So it's a best opportunity for India. We can say, hey, China, bring over your manufacturing. We have a lot of young people. Our median age is like 10 years younger than China. So we have this hundreds of millions of young people ready to work. So it's a wonderful opportunity for India to urbanize, to create manufacturing, and follow the footsteps of, like if you look at all of the successful developing nations, like say South Korea once used to be poor and then it became rich. Japan was devastated after World War II, and then they recovered and then they became rich. And with Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, you can see all these, the tigers, the Asian tigers, and they all followed the same formula. There's not really something very magical about it, but it needs a lot of discipline. It needs a lot of hard work, and there are like 50 things you have to do. I did a podcast on why and how China succeeded in manufacturing, and I thought it would be like maybe 5-10 minutes of a podcast, and it took me 50 minutes to go through all the things that they did. So it's actually very complex, but it's very doable. It's a formula, and we can do the same, and we can really find a win-win situation. And then we just have to postpone the border dispute for like another 30 years, So we can say, hey guys, so let's fight over this in 2050. Okay, so until 2050, let's not say a word about the border. Let's work on all the other issues that we can work on. And then, so people think that, oh, once you solve the border dispute, then we can be friends. But I think it's the opposite. Once we can be friends, the border becomes a very easy one to solve,
I really like that perspective because when I uploaded several videos about the BRICS bloc, I think this was a couple of years ago, I received several comments saying, well, this is not going to work out precisely because India and China cannot get along. But just as you said, I'm actually of the opinion that now that they are in this bloc, they clearly identify with the bloc's goals, right? De-dollarize, maintain their sovereignty, to expand economically, to grow their social standards of living, improve standards of living, grow manufacturing. So they clearly have found a common language. And so the next step would be to overcome those difficulties. And the border seems to be an important one. It's been ongoing for so many decades, but yet I think there are more important things on their priorities list that they have to address. And of course, this multipolarity that they're experiencing and they're supporting is absolutely one of them. So I find it very difficult to believe that the entire bloc will be unsuccessful just because of those differences between member states. So just as you mentioned, I think making sure that they're on the same page in terms of their goals will help them figure out solution to the border crisis, and maybe, or it's not really a crisis, I think the border issue, right, dispute, but as well as any other things that they may have disagreed with in the past. Are there any agreements or conversations taking place right now between China and India to help maybe develop infrastructure in India to outsource some manufacturing to India? Or is it something that's still sort of a thing out in the future?
If you look at Modi and Xi Jinping, they were actually very good friends. So they met like 20 times since Modi came to power. And in 2016, Modi went to China. 2017, Modi went to China. 2018, Modi went to China. And then 2019, Xi Jinping came to India. And they had a really, really good chemistry. And Xi Jinping came to Modi's birthplace city. Modi went to Xi Jinping's birthplace, Wuhan, Xi'an. So they had, but things were going so great. And then the 2020 conflict happened. And as, what George Orwell says, when there is a conflict, the propaganda becomes like, oh no, this person was always the enemy, and we just always hated them. Mm-hmm. And then people forget all the good things in the past, and they just focus on the negatives. But that said, the business community in India, they know that they have to work with China, because there's so much dependency. First of all, for example, if you look at the smartphones in India, 75% of the smartphones in India are actually Chinese brands, like Xiaomi, Vivo, Oppo, and they have like a whole bunch of Chinese brands, which are actually very, very good phones at a very low cost. I mean, it's really amazing. And then if you look at the pharmaceuticals, 75 to 80% of all the pharmaceutical drugs made in India depend on the APIs or the raw materials from China. So that's a big one. Then if you look at the electric vehicles, solar panels, and I mean, all, the leading edge, stuff, China is the leader in the world. Nobody can make a solar panel in the world without China being involved at some point. So nobody can make a battery in the world. Like just a regular battery, it's like 92% of the cathodes or the anodes are made in China. So you cannot even make a battery. And I look at all the things around my house, laptops, Wi-Fi routers, lamps, blah, blah, blah. Everything is made in China. So we need to work with China. We cannot live without China. And the businessmen, they totally understand that, like the steel manufacturers, they want to work with the Chinese company, SAIC. The Tata industry, one of the largest, the conglomerate, they want to work with Vivo to make smartphones in India. The Reliance industry, another big conglomerate, they just made a deal with Shane or Shine from China, the e-commerce giant, to sell the clothes in India. So the conflict is between the economics and politics, but I think the economics is going to win, but they have to fool the masses a little bit, and then to, because once you stoke the fire of nationalism, it's very hard to bring it down, So just like the U.S., if what Trump says he's going to meet with Putin, then the media would start to cry, Trump is a Putin puppet, right? Mm-hmm. So just this sort of the madness and the irrationality stops the politicians who started it in the first place. But that's the, yeah.
Exactly. And I think, of course, the media plays a very important part in shaping our worldview. So anything that doesn't align with the current agenda is automatically, as you mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, is automatically just demonized, and it's automatically very black and white world. It becomes very black and white without any nuances, and nuances are important because that's what helps us understand what's actually going on.